you should be able to prep nearly every ingredient and recipe with 2 knives. A primary chef's knife or gyuto, and then a secondary prep utility or petty. These are the 2 knives to rule them all. Got to throw a little Lord of the Rings in there. This video is going to be a little bit odd because my job is to film and write content around knives, so hopefully you who view this will buy a bunch of them. But the reality is, as I just explained, you don't necessarily need a bunch of knives. Need versus want are 2 very different things. In this video, I'm going to break down primary options and secondary options, and then I'm going to get into the 3rd, 4th, and possibly hybrid that covers the 2 that you may need depending on how often you're prepping and cooking certain ingredients. Let's dive in. Okay, I'm going to break this down in 2 ways. I'm going to give you the short and sweet, and then I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty nuance, knife nerd detail that I like to do in these videos, so you can really spot key features of these different knives that may or may not work for you. So here's the short and sweet. The very first knife that you need in your collection is a full-size 8-inch chef's knife / 210mm Gyuto, which is about an 8 1/4 inch. Let's just say 8 inches across the board, regardless of whether it's a Western German style knife or a Japanese. This is what you're getting with these blades. Let's start with just an OG here. Full bolster, full tang, fully forged, Wusthof classic blueberry. This is your iconic German chef's knife. 8-inch blade. You get a straight back profile with a nice curvature at the tip there. This knife is fantastic for any cutting technique. Now, let's take it up to a Japanese option like this Enso olive wood. We have an octagonal olive wood handle with a 8-inch blade, various finishes, Damascus, cladding, sashimi finish, but don't pay attention to that. Look at the blade profile. It's mostly straight at the back, and then there's a curvature at the tip. Again, this can handle any cutting technique. The way it feels in your hand is going to be very different than that Wusthof, but the knives are capable for nearly everything. So there's 2 big things that both these knives and everything in this row have. One would be the length, roughly 8 inches or 8 1/4 in that ballpark, and then they all have a point. If this is your primary, you're going to need a pointed tip. Why? Well, let's say you want to break down some broccoli florets off of a big crown and you need to be able to use the tip to get in there. That's where you need the tip. Let's say that you occasionally get a whole cut of, say, a pork loin or a beef tenderloin or anything where you are required to trim off some fat or silver skin. You need that point to be able to pierce and get in there. There's also plenty of other things you can use the tip for with a knife like this, but again, we're keeping this part simple. This is your primary, it's your everyday driver. It's what you're going to generally grab first before anything, even before your secondary. Now, there are some alternatives to this, which you'll have to watch later on in the video to get to that. Your secondary would be described in titles of these knives as either a petty, a utility, a prep, or in some cases, a Honesuki or a Ko-Bunka. So this would be this row over here. This is an example of a utility knife. Notice that there's not much of a heel here. It's very, very shallow, and this has a very straight blade profile. It's not as triangular as some of the others. This is a decent option for your secondary. Ideally, what you want to get is a petty or a utility. What's the difference real quick? Basically, a petty is the Japanese version of a utility knife, or you could say a utility knife is the Western, German, US version of a petty knife. Generally speaking, utility knives are going to be a little bit straighter and more narrow in their edge profile and their blade shape like this one, whereas a lot of petties will have a bit more of a heel to them like this Yoshikane. The benefit of this more triangular blade shape with this heel and the length in that 4.5 at the lower end up to 6 inches long is that this secondary knife has a bit of heel height. So depending on the curvature of the blade, you can get into a little bit of a tap or a push without cramming your knuckles into the board. And if you're holding it like this and you're just coming straight down in the handle, obviously you're going to hit. But if you just change the positioning of your hand where your fingers are up more to the side of the blade, and because of how light and nimble these knives are, you don't need a big grip, which the reality is you don't need a huge grip on any of these knives, and that's a whole other story, but you can get into a nice tap or push, you can slice, you can pierce because you have a pointed tip, and this narrow blade profile along with the length will allow you to break down a chicken, fillet a fish, trim whole proteins like pork loin, brisket, chuck roast, whatever it may be. The secondary is going to be, you have something real quick to do at home. Let's say you're just making a salad or a sandwich. You got to slice up some cucumber or pickles or tomato, some lettuce, whatever it may be. You can just grab this real quick. You don't necessarily need to grab your full-size knife. You can. In some ways, it is more efficient. You get a longer blade, you get a little bit more weight, which is going to help you get through product with more ease. But the reality is, this is kind of your just go-to quick task. This is your workhorse. This is where you're going to be prepping larger meals with. Now, even in a professional kitchen setting, I only worked in kitchens for a brief time, so I'm not going to pretend to be the absolute expert here. But all you have to do is watch some cooking shows or talk to some friends who do, which I have plenty of friends that are in kitchens. They are not using a different specialty knife for every single different type of thing, unless they're doing that thing repetitively. Do you need a curved boning knife? Maybe. It could be nicer to have. I love it for brisket, but will this do the trick? Yeah, it'll totally do the trick. So your primary is your workhorse, your secondary is there when you need it. That, in a nutshell, is the shorter version of me saying you don't need a knife set. And you don't need a bunch of specialty knives for different things. These two will handle 99% of kitchen tasks that you need to do with a knife. Now, short and sweet again. Let's say that you are cooking whole cuts of meat, rib roast, chuck roast. Maybe you just like to make a bunch of meatloaf and they're pretty decent size. Pork loin, tenderloin, you get it. Brisket, big cuts of meat. And you're not just doing this on the holidays during the summer with the smoker. This is something where you are regularly cooking smoked meats or big roasts. Then you may want to entertain getting a slicer. A slicer is going to be 9+ inches long. It's going to have a more narrow blade height in the sense of this way, it's width in the way you're looking at it, but this is actually what we call height. This height is going to minimize the amount of drag and resistance going into your food. Slicing brisket, it'll fall better, it won't stick to the side of the blade, it's longer, it's thinner, and this is fantastic for slicing both raw and cooked proteins. Some people even use slicers for certain vegetable prep as well. And because of how narrow this Yaxle ray is, you could even use this to break down different larger produce like that broccoli I said. You could trim meats with it. There's a lot of things you could do with this knife. And the heel height is similar to some of those I showed you earlier. It's just longer. So you're going from 8 inches to 9+. The next is, let's say that you are baking bread on a regular basis, or you're buying whole unsliced loaves from the grocery store or your favorite bakery. And I don't mean you're just getting it for Christmas and Thanksgiving as a special thing for your French onion soup. I mean, you're doing this on a regular basis. This is your primary way that you are consuming bread. If that's the case, then you would like to get yourself a bread knife. Now, a bread knife has jagged, pointed teeth that dig into your crusty outer layer so that you can get through that nice crispy crunch, while at the same time, they essentially slice and almost tear a little bit with the teeth at softer sandwich bread so you don't smush it. Excellent. Fourth knife. So, two knives to rule them all. I can't believe I messed up my Lord of the Rings little pun. 2 knives to rule them all, possibly a slicer, maybe a bread knife. And that's it. The 2 primaries and then your secondaries. Well, really it's 1 primary, secondary, and then your specialty because you're using them regularly. That is the short version of everything here. Now, let's dive a bit deeper for all of those who just have the time and really want to understand some of the nuance between these different types of knives. I'm going to go back to this Wusthof. One of the most popular knives in the world, I would say, well, at least here in the United States, Germany, and let's just say in the West. This is a fantastic blade. However, this full bolster is a bit uncomfortable at the pinch grip. It's probably one of the best-selling knives that, well, Cutlery and More has ever had, considering we've been around since the Stone Age. So, if you like the Wusthof and you want that softer German steel that is easier to hone, maintain, sharpen, if you leave it dirty for a bit, you're good to go. What I would recommend getting is the demi bolster version of the Wusthof Classic. Does 2 things. It's comfortable at the pinch grip, and the bolster does not impede the edge of the blade. You can see this is much harder to sharpen. So easier to sharpen, more comfortable, and a bit lighter because you're removing all of that extra stainless steel. Wusthof Classic Demi Bolster. Great for the price. This is a forever knife. I've had one for 13 or so years. Full bolster version. You get used to it. You'll develop a callus if you're using it regularly. So that's on the German side of the equation. Now, the complete opposite would be something like this Yoshikane. This has a semi-stainless steel core. Can this rust and patina? Yes, to a degree. You want to keep all your knives dry all the time. This has a Nasiji finish with a Kazumi mid blade. This is very traditional Japanese in the sense of we have an octagonal handle, and this is a hand-forged blade, so you get this beautiful distal taper, so it's thicker here and it widens out, very comfortable at the pinch grip. No bolster, just a tang that goes partially in with a blade-heavy experience. The difference between those knives is honestly night and day. The geometry is different, the balance is different. Leaning forward or leaning back, handle heavy or blade heavy, doesn't determine the quality of a knife. That's just going to be personal preference. If you're used to that Wusthof, full-bodied, full-tang, triple riveted type of handle, but you want to go a bit more Japanese leaning, you can get a hybrid like this Tojiro. Stainless steel, VG10 coming in at a 60 to 61 Rockwell, so right in the middle between this Wusthof and this Yoshikane. Triple riveted, full tang handle with a very minimalistic bolster. This is one of the most popular chef's knives, Gyutos, that there are. For the price, you can't beat it. We just got 300 in. I got the text yesterday, the day before. They'll probably be gone by the end of the year, and today is November 18th when I'm filming this. Excellent option, especially on the budget end. Now, you can see that there's a variety of different features and characteristics and steels and patterns. We've got a true coreless Damascus with this herringbone by Shun. This is the Shiranami. And then you go to Damascus cladding with 101 layers versus 71 layers. Natural birchwood handle. That's the really pretty side. All of these are great options. This is a hand-forged Zuma with a synthetic Kurochi, very easy to maintain, coming out of China, based off of a Japanese Gyuto made with American BG42 stainless steel. It's a beautiful mashup. This is thicker at the spine, like that Yoshikane, so it tapers off, very comfortable at the pinch grip. And then you have a stamp knife like this Enso olive wood, great blade, very, very thin at the spine, super, super lightweight, better food release because of that hammered finish. The thing they all have in common, again, regardless of their different features, is going to be a pointed tip 8 inches long. Now, this global G2, incredibly popular because of Anthony Bourdain rocking globals back in the day. Unique Japanese design, mono steel piering. This is welded right here, so it gives it as if it is one single piece. The handle is weighted with sand. It is originally hollow. This is coming in at 56 to 58 Rockwell. Very easy to hone, maintain, pretty fine geometry compared to, say, like a Wusthof or a Zwilling. Now, this is the Global Model X. Get my autofocus there. Look at the difference in the spine thickness from this to that. It's twice as thick. Here's the deal. This is one of our exclusive lines, the Global Model X, we have at Cutlery more. Great knife. Really fun to use, actually, especially when you need that extra weight. But as your primary, as your everyday driver, would I recommend this? Nope. If this is the only chef's knife you have, will it work? Yes. But you're going to experience some fatigue because of the weight as you are using this blade. And the thickness of that spine, as great as it is for certain applications, and the geometry is pretty decent considering how thick it is. It holds an edge great. This, if you only have 2 knives to rule them all, this one's gonna slow you down a little bit. So, awesome blade, but not the best for your everyday, this is your primary, unless maybe you're used to using very heavy German blades. But I can tell you the difference between these two is significant, and when you're prepping for a couple hours at a time, if you're even doing that, you will definitely begin to feel that. So these are our primaries. Went through a couple different specs just so you can see a couple of the different knives. The Mac Pro here with the hollows on the edge, which aid in food release, and another incredibly popular knife. Okay, 8 inch, let's go up to between 9 and 10, or 9.4, or what is it, 240 millimeter up to 10 inches. This is a Matsubara. This has a Kurochi finish, Kazumi mid blade, Sanmai construction, octagonal burnt oak handle. I believe this is Shirogami 1 carbon steel, and maybe Aogami blue. You'll have to just look for it. Actually, it's not even in stock, but I'm showing this to you in the sense of size. These are what I would consider a extra large, full size primary option. This is my first chef's knife, Zwilling Pro, 10 inches. This got me through culinary school and many, many other jobs that I did, private chef gigs, and even when I was working in some kitchens. Between these two, if I had to choose, I would actually go with the Matsubara, only because of the curvature of the tip. I use this, I got used to that tip, but what I found is that when you have a tip that's more centered or edge leaning, you can get into a better tap chop with the tip of the blade. This is an Enso HD VG10 stainless steel, 37 layers of Damascus cladding, sashimi finish, a weighted full tang triple riveted handle. So is this one piece that's going down in? No, but it is still full tang in the sense of there is a tang that goes all the way through the handle into the end cap. This is a beautiful blade, and for the length, for a Japanese knife, has a nice balance to it. The benefit of this compared to that is we have fully stainless steel, very easy to maintain, and this is going to have a more Western style, full-bodied, Wusthof-esque type of feel in the handle. Here's another, this is a Takayuki, and very similar to the Matsubara. Now notice the difference in the height of the blade. This is extra tall, and this was what we would just consider a normal height for a chef's knife or a Gyuto. This has an even more downward tip to it. So if you're really accustomed to doing the European style rock chop, you want to stay away from a knife that is like this. Or if that's all you've seen people do and that's what you're thinking, oh, that's how I'm going to use a knife, steer clear of a knife that has a downward leaning tip because it's going to inhibit you from really being able to get into a nice flow. Now, let's say you're looking to upgrade. You've got a really cheap Amazon knife, a ceramic or something like that, or a hand-me-down, and you want to replace your current primary. Maybe it's an old school Wusthof like my wife was given by her mom before we met. Maybe it's a decent knife, you just don't like the way it feels and you're looking for something else. Carbon steel. Anything made with carbon steel will rust or patina if you take care of it, but you should keep all your knives dry. The next thing is the Rockwell hardness. A knife below, say, 60 Rockwell can handle most cutting techniques so long as you're not using it on a glass, titanium, or some super hard cutting board. You want to keep maple, black walnut, cherry, or below. I've got a video on cutting boards you can check out. That way you don't damage the blade. High Rockwell knives, they don't like being twisted and torqued and pivoted, so there's certain cutting techniques like the rock chop or cross chop mincing that they don't do very well with. So stick with, say, the Tojiro, the Mac, the Global, the Wusthof, even this Enso. That's a little thin behind the edge, so probably not that one, but this Enso would hold up, the HD versus the olive wood, the Zwilling, but stay away from these higher Rockwell Japanese knives. Okay, not to tangent on that, but it deserved a little bit of a conversation here. There's your primary options. Here's the deal. Earlier I talked about slicing. I'm gonna skip something here. I'm gonna go out of order in how I was presenting this in my mind. A slicer, on average, is 9 to 12 inches. That's 9 to, I believe, 10 and a quarter, and then we can go over to 12. I'm gonna talk more about slicers in a little bit, but here's the deal, 9 to 12 inches. Well, here's the thing. If you get yourself a 9.5 or 10-inch full-size chef's knife or Gyuto as your primary, this will slice just fine. Is it taller? Is it gonna have a little bit more drag compared to those? Yes, but unless you're going back and forth and you're blindfolded and there's white noise playing so you can only focus on that and your knives and your cutting board, you're never really gonna notice a huge difference. So if you are comfortable with a larger knife and you smoke or roast a lot of larger meats on a regular basis, you may wanna go with a longer 9+ inch primary chef's knife or Gyuto that will replace the slicer. Okay, let's go into alternative options for your primary. The first is going to be the Kiritsuke, or as some would simply call a K-tip Gyuto. So this is a traditional Japanese Gyuto. If you look at the difference between this and this just has a hard angled slice at the top and this is rounded. This is a Gyuto. This is a Kiritsuke by Enso. This is our hand forge, Aogami Super, 64 to 65 Rockwell. This is the Yoshikane Kurochi with their Shiranami stainless steel. And this is also a Kiritsuke. Here's the thing, technically speaking, neither of these are Kiritsukes because they are a double bevel knife. A traditional Kiritsuke, like a Honesuki I'm going to talk about in a minute, are single bevel knives originally. Well, times have changed. Most of them, at least here in the United States, you're going to get your hands on, are going to be a double bevel. In that case, whether it's marketed as a Kiritsuke or a K-tip Gyuto, like this Kurosaki, serves the same purpose. You have a full size. This is 8 1/4, 8 1/4. That's around 9.4. I think that's a 240 millimeter. It's basically a Gyuto, but it has a K-tip to it, a reverse Tanto style tip with a very fine point that is going to be, this one's a little bit more centered. These are more edge leaning. You're generally going to find this style with Japanese knives, so they're going to essentially automatically have a higher Rockwell. This could easily be your primary. They're great knives to work with, and they will do everything that any of these other chefs or Gyutos can do. Do they have a little bit better piercing ability? Yes, absolutely. But at the end of the day, when you look at the tip of that versus that one over there, in the sense of what's actually going in, it's not going to be extremely different. You can still trim some silver skin, get rid of some fat cap if you need to with either one of these. Okay, they're all full size. Next is going to be a little bit shorter, like the Bunka. Here are 3 different Bunkas. Biggest difference. These two are 7 inches. This is 6.5. Let me line up the heels there. That extra ½ inch makes a difference, especially if this is going to be your primary blade. So if you are going to steer clear of a traditional chef's Gyuto, Kiritsuke, K-tip Gyuto, and you want something a little bit smaller, that 7-inch mark is definitely going to be the place you're going to want to be. When you get down to a shorter blade, they're nice to use. I use Bunkas all the time. A lot of them are 6.5 inches. This Zuma, this Enso, 7-inch, they're great. These two have a higher height to them, which is better for more stability and taller ingredients, but also for scooping product off your cutting board. Now, the Enso Hachi here, could you use this as your primary? Yes, but if you're working with whole cuts of meat, or you're regularly prepping larger ingredients, even something as simple as you go through watermelon galore like I do during the summer, you're probably gonna want a bit of a longer blade. So if you like the Bunka, is this a great primary option? Absolutely, but try and keep around that 7-inch mark. Now, here's something else to notice about a Bunka. Some of them are shaped very differently. 6.5, 7, 6.5. Look at the difference in the curvature of this Takayuki compared to the straighter edge profile and the height at the K-tip of, by the way, a Bunka is essentially a short Kiritsuke that's double bevel. That's the simple way that I would explain it to everyone. But most people probably don't even know what a Kiritsuke is to describe that, but in the event, that's how I would. It's a shorter Kiritsuke. But back to the curvature of this blade. You are getting a very straight edge profile here, excellent contact with the cutting board, which is something you need for your primer. You need to be able to make good contact, even compared to this Wusthof, which does have a pretty pronounced curve at the tip, but because it's 8 inches, you still get at least 1/3 to half of the base of the blade that is going to give you excellent cutting board contact so you can get through ingredients without having to do any type of extra motion. This Takayuki is an awesome blade. I've used it. It was a lot of fun. It's great. It's actually could almost fall into this category, but for a primary, not the best option. And the reason why is because you're going to lose cutting board contact because of that significant curvature at the tip of the blade. So again, if you're gonna go the Bunka route, you wanna get yourself ideally 7 inches, but you could do 6.5. You just gotta consider, what are you prepping regularly? And also, maybe you need something smaller because you're working in a tight, confined space. You have a small cutting board, a small kitchen. If that's the case, you'll be good. You're gonna be fine. Could you still break down a watermelon with that? Yeah, I've broken down watermelon with this Yoshikane. You can do it. it just takes a bit more time and it's not as easy. Here is an interesting blade. This is a really cool blade. This is the Shun Shiranami Master Utility. This is essentially a bunka. Let's compare it to a full-size bunka like this Zuma hand forge. It has a much shorter, in the sense of the height of a blade. With that, do you get knuckle clearance? Yes, depending on where you're using it. Could you use this as a primary because it's that 6.5 inch mark? You could. Would I recommend it? No, but you could. So if you see this blade and you're like, I need a small knife, I like the K-tip, I want something nimble but also grippy at the handle, it looks cool, this is gonna be my primary. Again, consider the ingredients you're prepping on a regular basis. Okay, the Santoku. I'm gonna show you two that are completely different. This is the Wusthof Icon Classic. No bolster, well, no full bolster, which is great. Very straight edge profile, hollows on the edge to aid in food release. This is one of the most popular knives in the United States, the Santoku, this version of it. Not necessarily this Wusthof, but I believe it was the Wusthof Grand Prix and the Classic that just, they're everywhere. This is a traditional Japanese Santoku. Big difference, octagonal handle, no bolster, carbon steel, Aogami 2, hand forged, just a completely different knife. What both of these knives have in common is a relatively straighter edge profile. This one has more of a curvature with a soft slope to the spine. Basically, what's the difference between a Santoku and a bunka? Well, really the biggest difference is going to be the Santoku has a rounded tip, whereas the bunka has a K-tip. Now, these knives could easily be your primary. Man, my autofocus, I need to get this a little bit more sensitive. Be more sensitive, please. Okay. Great everyday prep knives. Great for a primary everyday driver. Again, 6.5 inches is usually where they're at. This is 7. This is 6.5, and this Miyabi Koya is 7.5. That is a full-size Santoku. So if you like the shape, you like the look, you like everything about a Santoku knife, and this is what you want as your everyday driver, then go with the 7-inch Wusthof or any 7-inch Santoku, or see if you can get yourself a 7.5-inch like this Miyabi Koya. I'm telling you, it will make a huge difference. Let's say you want the best of both worlds. German profile, Japanese blade, the Mac Pro Mighty with hollows, another great option coming in at that 6.5-inch mark. Again, look at the difference. This one, I believe, is 8.25. I mean, that 1.5 difference. Inch and a quarter, it's somewhere around there. Some of these knives we say are 8 inches, but they're 8.25, or some actually, they'll say they're 8 and they're just under that. It really kind of has to do with the curvature and how you're exactly measuring it. Okay, that covers our primary, our big primaries, and then our alternatives. Let's now get into the nitty-gritty of petty, utility, prep, Honesuki, Ko-Bunka. They all fall into this prep knife category, which is primarily, I'm going to explain some of the differences, but let's start again, go back to this Enso. Enso HD, you've seen a couple of them so far. Great blade. I've used this quite a bit. I've used it to trim meats and everything else. I would call this a utility because of how straight, not as triangular, and shallow of a heel that this has. If this is your secondary, you're gonna be totally fine. Ideally though, would you like, get yourself a petty or a utility that has a bit more of a heel. As I explained in the beginning of the video, the biggest thing there is that this, just even if I'm pulling my fingers way back. So I'm just hardly gripping with my fingertips. Tap, I'm banging into the cutting board. Whereas with this Yoshikane, this Tojiro, this Shun, every single one of these, because of that extended heel, I can get that same lighter grip and then no knuckle banging, no knuckle banging, no knuckle banging. I've already explained a lot about carbon steel and Rockwell and these different fits and finishes with these blades, so I'm not going to get into that with these for the sake of time. Your secondary needs to have a heel and a pointed tip, which most are going to in this category, actually every single one of them. It's just going to be dependent on how pointed is the tip and how narrow does the tip get, which we'll get into. This is the Wusthof Asian prep knife. This throws off Honesuki vibes, which I'm going to dive into next. You get a nice heel height. There's a minimalistic bolster, very lightweight, and a nice pointed tip here. You can see this kind of has a K-tip type of vibe, which I think that Wusthof mirrored the design of that off of a traditional Honesuki, which also looks like Honesuki, Honesuki, Honesuki. This, not this knife specifically, I believe the other one is, oh, it's downstairs on my block, where it belongs, right? Yeah, downstairs. I use this a lot. This is the Shun Classic. I got this during culinary school. I broke the tip off of it at one point. That's why I know this isn't that. So where is that knife at? Oh, it must be downstairs. D-shaped, pack of wood handle, very soft D-shape, so left-handed folk, you could use something like this. This knife, coming in at 4.5 inches, is shorter than what is ideal for a prep knife. But because of the way this tip comes together and the height of the heel, I used to challenge myself to prep entire meals, multi-course meals, with just this blade. And I would do it. And I would do it effortlessly. With decent knife skills, you should be able to take almost any one of these knives, except for, let's say, the more specialty, and just roll with it. Just rock. I challenge you, actually, even if you're watching this and you have plenty of knives and you're just bored, you're trying to get to sleep, or you woke up at 3 a.m. and you can't sleep, so you ended up on YouTube and you're watching me for whatever reason. Sorry about that. But if that's the case and you have a bunch of knives, I challenge you to find a smaller blade in your collection and only use that for a week. It's a fun game, especially if you have a bunch of knives. It just shifts things a bit. It's actually what got me so obsessed with this style, this prep knife style, or Honesuki. This used to be called a prep knife back in the day when I got it. Then they finally, I believe, started calling it a Honesuki. So it had to do with a lot of the marketing. Okay, a traditional Honesuki is a single bevel. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see here, but see how this side of the blade is dead straight, and then this side is where the geometry changes for it to be sharpened. There you go, trail shot, you can see it. A single bevel Honesuki, traditionally a Japanese poultry boning knife, is fantastic. But for everyday prep, as your secondary, I would not recommend getting a single bevel. There's a pull to one side. If you're not used to using it, they're different in the sense of honing and sharpening. So if you're going to go the route of a Honesuki, I would go double bevel. Now, some of these other ones are a bit longer than what, well, I kind of went from longer. These are around that 5.5 to 6 inch mark, 4.5, same thing, 5.5 to 6 inch, or 5.9 inch, which is what, I forget the millimeter. I'm from New Jersey. I don't know millimeters very well. Okay. We're getting into the more fuller size. Here's another Honesuki. Fantastic blade. Such a cool story. 700 years of Moritaka knife making within the family. Here's the thing. This would be better as a boning knife. That thick spine is going to give you leverage to be able to use that spine. Could you use a thinner spine for leverage when popping off knuckles of a chicken leg, absolutely you could. But the thing is with this knife is the way this is sharpened. You can see that it has a very abrupt triangle to it. The geometry widens out and gets very thick behind the edge very quickly. With that, for everyday prep, especially firmer ingredients like an apple, carrot, squash, things like that, you're gonna experience some wedging where you push in and instead of it necessarily slicing, it is slicing while also splitting your ingredient at the same time. I've done everyday prep with this knife, testing it out, and then I pick up another one that's thinner at the spine or it has a better taper to the geometry, and it's a night and day difference. Which brings me to this Hatsukokoro Kumokage. Very thick at the spine, just like the other one. But when you look at how this is sharpened, you can see that, there we go. A much better flow to the geometry. And with that, this has become one of my favorite prep knives. Plenty of heel height, super sharp edge, pointed tip. I have broken down brisket, pork loin, chicken thighs, and then use this for everything you could think of in the sense of produce, fruits, and vegetables. I've also used this just as my everyday. Again, I've challenged myself with that Shun. This one came to my collection and it just feels good. There's certain knives that are gonna speak to you. I'm very fortunate to have the ability through Cutlery More to play with all of these knives and spend time with them. If you find that you really love that thicker spine of a hand-forged blade like that, or this Zuma, bit thicker, not as thick as that Yoshikane, but still thicker. Or let's see here. Well, this is the Zuma Gyuto, quite a bit thicker. If you find that you like that feel in a full-sized blade, try and find a prime or a secondary that's going to have that same type of feel, and you'll find yourself gravitating towards your secondary a lot more often. I feel like I have... Am I just like blown a little bit on my little facial hair here? Okay. No. Yeah, it must just be the way I'm breathing down or something here. Most people edit that type of stuff out. I keep it in because let's keep it real. Okay. This is the Zwilling Tanray. This is called a utility, I believe, on the site. Big difference in the sense of heel height. So with that, if you see a knife that's described as utility, prep, petty, whatever, ignore the descriptions because some of them are given to us, for example, at Cutlery More, and we use whatever the maker says. Some we would change if we really wanted to. Some are so far off we actually do change, but it's very rare. So when you are looking for a secondary, forget about the name and description. Look at the length, look at the heel height. You can tell by images, you can just compare. And then also the tip. How is the tip designed? Miyabi Koya. This one's awesome. And the reason why is because the angle of the blade, it's actually pretty straight here when it hits the cutting board. But in this kind of offsets in a way, if I were to hold it offsets, it's an opposite. So the spine itself from the handle flares out that way. And with that, it changes the way that you hit the cutting board. What you'll find with this is even though the heel height of this may be less than some of these other secondary prep knives, you actually get more knuckle clearance because it's shifting. You're not parallel to the cutting board, you're now up at a higher angle to be able to make the contact here. So that's just a really cool Miyabi Koya, FC61 stainless steel, 61 Rockwell, just a really cool blade. The Ko is the same thing, just with a black handle. Now, we're going to go into the world of Ko bunkas. Ko in Japanese, meaning baby. This is a full-size bunka. And this is a Ko-Bunka. It is the shorter version. We go from a 7-inch blade. In fact, let's bring the Hachi. 6.5 inches, I would say, would be more traditional for a bunka, but oh my gosh, did I not hit record? Oh man, I tell you, I've done that a few times in videos. Fortunately, not this far in where I didn't hit record. Hachi bunka versus the Hatsukokoro Kirigane Ko-Bunka. This has Honesuki vibes. If you were to look at the shape of that compared to the Shun, I would say it's almost more of a Honesuki than a Ko-Bunka, but again, it is essentially a shorter bunka, and you could even say that Honesuki double bevel is a shorter bunka. Plenty of knuckle clearance, great blade. The difference of this and these other two, and this is where you're going to have to consider how you are prepping ingredients. Notice the tip here is more Honesuki-like. You can get more of a pierce. The Enso SG2 and the Enso Hachi, along with a lot of other Ko-Bunkas, they're going to vary in the tip of the blade. They can still pierce, but the angle is much wider here than it would be for this Hatsukokoro or this other Hatsukokoro, even this Miyabi. These are fantastic prep knives. I love that Shun Honesuki because I've used it for so long. I gravitate towards these probably even more so now because of the straighter edge profile, the heel height. You get a bit more steel in the blade. They're also a bit longer, a little bit more of a balanced feel because of it. Fantastic. I've got other Ko-Bunkas around and other tiny knives. There's one. That one's kind of, I put that into it. But so with these, what you have to consider is, as your secondary, considering this is going to be replacing a boning knife, a fillet knife, and various other specialty knives, if you absolutely need a super narrow, fine, nimble tip of a knife because you're trying to replace a boning knife and you're using that on a regular basis, then the Ko-Bunka may not be the best option. However, if you're not worried about that because you have yourself a primary that has a nice tip to it that you could use for trimming meats, which you definitely can, done it many times. I've even used this super curvy, which is kind of odd when it comes to trimming meats, zwilling for breaking down whole cuts of meat. You can do it with your primary. If that's the case, and you want something that is fantastic for veg prep, making quick meals, or just everyday prep minus that piercing ability to be able to really get in and under silver skin, and more silver skin. Fat, you can come along to the side. Silver skin, a lot of time you need to get under it. So if you're not doing that on a regular basis, then go for one of these. I'm telling you. The Honesuki Ko-Bunka, the Enso prep, is marketed as a prep. Again, there's a barrier in a lot of Japanese names that people see and they're just like, oh, I don't know what that is. I'm going to move to the next one. But you call a Ko-Bunka a prep knife and all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, I need a prep knife. So keep that in mind. The heel height of the Ko-Bunka and the Honesuki, or the utility as they're described style, are phenomenal. These petties over here with their heel height, still fantastic. They're going to get the job done. They're going to do what a secondary is supposed to do. Primary, secondary, primary alternatives. Oh, I forgot when I was going over my alternatives. Why didn't I talk about the Nakiri? Well, if you've been paying attention, One of the key things that I said you need for your primary is a pointed tip. The Nakiri and the Chinese cleaver. What is going on with my autofocus today? Let's go. Come on, I'm gonna have to change some of the settings. The problem is these don't have a pointed tip. And I just got done talking about these with a pointed tip not being good for certain things, mainly removing silver skin. Again, if you're not doing it, who cares? Okay. Neither of these have it. Do many people in many cultures prep with nakiris and Chinese cleavers for a lot of different types of ingredients? Absolutely. I love using them. But again, we're talking about the two knives you need. If you don't care about piercing, go with the nakiri. Get yourself a Chinese cleaver. Go for it. But based off of my experience and many other people I've talked to, just really forget about all of that. It's just my experience. Pointed tip, primary is going to be important. Okay, let's get into slicers and bread knives and the hybrid. We're gonna wrap this up. I already showed you a couple of these slicers. They're coming in at 9 to, you know what it is? I just realized it. My new studio setup here, my TV I use for my monitor, for my top-down camera, it's back further. So I'm putting my hand where the center used to be on the TV, but look. So I just have to move this forward like 6 inches, and that's going to be that natural positioning because I'm looking at it. Oh, maybe not. Okay, it took a second there. You know, I'm just gonna have to go through some settings here. Something might have gotten bumped during the move. Okay, that's the Yaxle Ray. This is the Steelport coffee patina, and then we have the Mac Pro slicer. We go from 9 up to 10 and a quarter, I believe the Mac is. What do you get? As I explained before, it's a shorter blade, not as tall this way compared to a primary. You get a bit of a heel because as you're slicing, sometimes you do need to go into that cutting board, especially as you're coming down on a curve, depending on the shape of the blade. Generally a pointed tip. The Steelport here has a little bit of a Santoku-esque vibe to the tip compared to the K-tip or just the regular here. The difference in these three, aside from length and features and different things like that, straighter edge profile, more of a rounded curvature, a much more pronounced rounded curvature, and that's mainly because of the length. The Yaxle and the other slicers I show you make excellent cutting board contact. These two, when I hold them up, I mean, the tips are an inch or so off the board. You might be able to see a little bit of that. These give off some carving knife type of vibe. So for off the board type of slicing, say you're cutting the breast of a turkey or you're coming down on ham, that curvature is really nice. Now, if you are cooking more brisket and roast and things like that, where it's always being sliced into and on the cutting board, then I would recommend getting a straighter edge profile. If you do want something that is going to work for off the board slicing, then when you're slicing with, say, this curvy Mac Pro, it's how you're pulling your arm up to continue to have surface contact all the way through. If I just pull back, it's not touching right there. But you want to use the whole blade when you're slicing. That's the whole point. 1 or 2 type of motions. You don't want to be sawing. With a shorter blade, sometimes you have to saw. If this is your primary 8 inches and you need to slice something, you'll be fine. Sawing doesn't change the flavor. It just changes how the slice looks. So if you do get a blade that has a curvature like this, you're going to have to pull through and finish with your wrist and your elbow coming up. Or you get yourself for, gosh, this blade, the Global Model X 12-inch hollow edge brisket slicer. This is a beast. Model X, same 4mm spine. Now earlier, I showed you a Model X as a potential primary, and I didn't recommend it because it's a bit thick for a primary. But for a slicing knife that you're only using for a few minutes at a time, unless you're working at Terry Black's and you're slicing briskies all day, this, you want that extra weight. I'm telling you, I love this thing. It weighs like 87 pounds, and you get the flared out bolster of the Model X series, the same dimples in the handle. I can't remember how much it weighs, but I mean, it's an absolute beast. The weight that this gives you as you're going in and pulling through, although it's heavier, it is doing work for you because of that weight. It is absolutely brilliant. Next up, a lighter version, more traditional Japanese, would be the Enso Hachi. Now earlier I showed you an Enso Hachi Bunka that was coming in at that 6.5 mark. I would try and go bigger if that's going to be your primary, but if you need yourself a slicer, the Hachi slicer is fantastic. SG2 stainless steel core, Sanmai construction, synthetic karochi with a sashimi finish, two-tone pakkawood white ring. Gosh, it's a beautiful, beautiful blade. Very straight edge profile. Great for seafood. Great for what I found. I noticed it with this one. Cold, dense meats like leftover chicken breast or turkey. I wanted a little extra weight. That's where that global comes in. But for cooked meats that are filled with those beautiful juices after resting, and the blade geometry of this, ooh. Okay. Why would you need one of those? Because you're making brisket or a roast or things like that a couple times a month. That's when you invest in a slicer. Now, bread. Bread's pretty simple. You get a serrated blade. That means that you have jagged peaks, you have jagged teeth that can dig into your bread. This Opinel, sorry, not totally sure exact pronunciation of this, gives off carving knife vibes because of the blade shape, but again, this is a single bevel. Notice the bevel's on a different side for the French-made knife compared to the Japanese. Single bevel, you're going to dig into crusty bread. You're going to have that same type of cutting motion as your slicer to get through it. Try not to saw, and these are beautiful. Zilling Tanray, the Enso SG2, and then the, I think it's Opinel. Opinel? You let me know. Bread knives. Should you use a bread knife for slicing meats? Because you need something longer in that 9+ inch mark. Could you do it? Yes. Ideally, if you're making a bunch of bread and you occasionally do meats, you'll be totally fine. But if you are looking for a meat slicer, stay away from a serrated, jagged tooth, and you want to go with a straighter edge. Or you can get yourself the hybrid, the Wusthof. Oh wow, I just noticed this callus on my finger. I just moved, so my hands are just destroyed. So if that weirded you out throughout the whole video and for some reason I just noticed it now, oh well, here we go. This is the Wusthof Super Slicer. This has scalloped edge. They are half circles. They are rounded. There's no jagged teeth. It's almost like an inverted serrated because the point goes into the blade versus out. With this, you're going to have for cooked meats, even raw meats, but cooked proteins especially turkey and chicken, things like that have really fine muscle structure. When you go into the meat, it's not going to tear it as much as a serrated blade. It's going to do more of a slice. For bread, you still get enough oomph there so that you can get through that super crusty Italian bread or ciabatta, sourdough, no problem whatsoever. This is your hybrid. Primary, Secondary, and this is for folks who like to cut their own bread from the grocery store or bake their own bread while also enjoying some large cooked proteins on a regular basis, but only get one knife that'll do the job. Check this out. I noticed this today. This is the Enso SG2. Notice how the back part of the blade is less jagged than the front couple of teeth here. Like it's softer here, and then it gets higher and pointier, and then it essentially mellows out as you go down the blade. This I would put into that hybrid category. It's just going to depend on really how long your meat is. So if you're cutting, say, some pork loin, which can be yay big, start at the base of the blade, get in, and then you can pull through. If you have this little bit of jaggedness, you're still going to be fine, but it's an interesting hybrid. Scalloped edge knives are not as abundant as all the others that I just showed here today. So the Mac slicer has more of a scalloped edge, and so does one of the Tojiro slicers. I don't have them in my collection. The Wusthof Super Slicer is the only one that I have that has a proper scalloped edge all throughout. Woo! Okay. Quick recap. You don't need a knife set, and you don't need a ton of knives or individual specialty knives for everything. We're a knife retailer. We'd love to sell you as many knives as you would like to have. However, there is a lot of marketing, especially with these sets and trios and quad bundles and things like that, that people think they need these knives. You don't. Honestly, right here, all day, every day. I have pretty decent knife skills. I'm not the best in the world. I'm definitely not the worst. I know how to use a blade. I could do pretty much everything with this. Just this one blade. If I had this next to it, whew, unstoppable. And a sharp knife, even at 8 inches, is gonna get through some crusty bread. Sometimes all you gotta do, honestly, is turn it over and hit it at a different angle where you can pierce, like, say if your bread is like that, if you can pierce right there, get through that little bit, and now you're golden. Instead of just going at the top where it's a little bit wider, you have more surface area, there's more like a bridge. Okay, I'm gonna stop doing that. Anyway, from there, if you need a slicer, you need a bread knife, go get them, have at it. Get as many knives as you like, but the point is you don't need them. Whew, that was a lot. I'm glad I broke this down into the short and the long, probably going for like 7 hours at this point in this video. That wraps it up. I'm Chef Brandon with Cutlery and More. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let me know in the comments. Is one knife gonna do the trick? Just a primary? Are you a duo? Or do you use the third, the fourth, or maybe the hybrid that allows you to just have 3? Honestly, how many knives do you use on a regular basis? Thanks for tuning in. Check out all these knives at cutleryandmore.com. Take care.